The Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burt and Gary Capel.
Welcome to the third edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast, brought to you by myself, Debbie Burt, and Gary Capewell. Gary's working from home today. Nice selection of cards on the mantelpiece there, Gary. And we'll look forward to reviewing the Arabian Racehorse Maiden Stakes at Wolverhampton, which was run on Tuesday. We'll have a look at our next race, which is the Baker McVeigh International 0 to 105 Handicap next Monday. And we'll also have a look at the racing from France. And we'll start off with the ArabianRacing.com Maiden Stakes. We had 12 runners. I was very pleased to see that we had 8 different owners, albeit that there are a lot of blue colours in the race. Some of them were different. Obviously, Gary, must be a relief for you not to be commentating and having to take a pick of a lot of horses which look all the same on the first go round.
Yes, Tim Peters obviously did the call on Monday, and Gareth had to do the race at Wolverhampton, where I think he had 5 Hamdan Al Maktoum horses, plus a lot of other blue, and Tim had 6, I think, on Monday. And there's a chance that this coming Monday there might be even more than that for Mark Slater to have to deal with.
Absolutely. And unfortunately we lost Big All, but I believe that was more of a paperwork issue than health concerns. So hopefully we'll be seeing him out soon when those issues have been resolved. I thought I was very pleased with the race, as I would be because I sponsored it. But I thought it was a professional performance from Tufan. After the race, both James and Alex said how much he'd come on at home in the last couple of weeks, and the penny had really been dropping with him. He's a big horse. Obviously, it's taken him some time to come into himself, but he certainly ran in a very professional manner. And providing that he can develop this improvement, then he should be a nice horse, certainly for next year. James did say he didn't want to rush him. He's by Mahab, like Manark, who did so well for them in the Cahill Classic a few years ago for Sheikh Hamdan. And the dam was pretty smart up to a mile, and I noticed she was 4th into McKeefer in the Hatter. So there was plenty to go on in his pedigree. What did you think of the race, Gary?
Yeah, he's obviously a much bigger horse, isn't he, than the runner-up, his stable companion, Winasa, who went down fighting in the end, but was 3/4 of a length behind Tufan, who, as you point out, went through the race very, very professionally. There's a lot to like about the performance, and I think even in the final half furlong, he had a little bit of a look around as well. He was kind of half-pricking his ears, to me, indicating there was plenty still left in the tank. In the end, the front pair have pulled nicely clear of the third horse, Tufan Akrat, who we might see a little bit more of next year. Obviously, he's quite a big horse as well. The runner at Winasa, she's bumped into one here, really, hasn't she? And they'll be looking to get a win into her sooner rather than later, hopefully. They were nicely clear there, the front pair of the third, and the 4th G1, who shaped quite nicely and might be more interesting in handicap company, maybe even when he steps up in trip. And they pulled nicely clear of the others. Quite a few of the others looked, I think, in need of the experience. Absolutely.
James also mentioned, actually, that he will probably drop Winasa back in trip, which wouldn't be a surprise. But obviously, she's a 3-year-old against a 4-year-old colt. So, again, not an entirely surprising result in that score.
No, and I'd imagine just looking at her, she might just have I know she's a filly, but she might just have a little bit more growing to do, obviously, up against the colts or... in Tufan's case, she was always going to look a little bit smaller, wasn't she? But there may well be a bit more growing to do. And yeah, stepping back down, it won't be an issue because she travels quite well into a race. Obviously, she hit the front quite a fair way from home on a race course debut. Dane O'Neill was at pains to hold on to for almost for as long as possible, really. But as I say, they pulled nicely clear of the third, but she just couldn't get past the stable companion.
To our next race coming up in the UK, which is the Baker McVeigh International Handicap Stakes for a 0 to 105 race. This is the best domestic race we've had so far this year. And it's a step up in trip for a few horses as we're going over 1.5 miles this time. Top of the handicap, we've got Alcázar, who's obviously proven up to 2 miles, and Bia Athbar, who won over this trip at Lingfield on the poly track last year, her last run of the season.
Yeah, both those two are confirmed on the surface as well, aren't they? Which is going to be a plus. Bayrath Bar got disqualified from a race here last year, but was first past the post and has also won at Lingfield as well. And she showed herself to be in rude health, didn't she, when running really well in the Qatar International at Gouda. That was a fantastic performance. Obviously, she's been high up in the weights for that, but she clearly looks to have improved over the winter and, well, there you say, the summer almost now as well. Alcácer, you point out that he definitely will stay. He's won over 2 miles obviously before, and we know that he's won here before as well, so conditions aren't going to be an issue for him. I think this is a good quality handicap. There's plenty of strength and depth to this particular contest. Obviously, James has got Tajari likely to run in there, and also Jarhez and Marowid lower down in the weights. And obviously, there's some decent entries from the Phil Collington yard as well. So, Libre des Forges, one of Phil's runners. This is a horse who we know likes it here. He's won here before, albeit over a mile, and indeed actually 10 furlongs on his final start last campaign. That was in a similar grade to this as well. So he obviously has to have fair claims. That's too, I think, Anne Farce as well. They tried to step her up in trip towards the back end of last season. She actually finished third, obviously, behind a Bayrath Bar in that race at Lingfield, but she kept on well in the closing stages. And I think at this stage of her career, 1.5 miles should be okay. And she's obviously won here previously as well. So they're the two that are perhaps like maybe the most from the Phil Collington team, but he's also got a few of the others lurking towards the bottom, the likes of Jinan. So it's shaping up to be a very, very competitive race, as it should be for the grade. Absolutely.
Just to mention Jinan, she's obviously related to Salima, who was a very good stayer, and she was very well suited. She won at Wolverhampton as well. She looked from her earlier runs that she definitely would suit a step up to this distance. Would you agree?
Yeah, very much so. Obviously, she's ran in both those Wolverhampton or those 2 races at Wolverhampton already this season. Obviously, in the handicap, she finished 6th on her handicap debut. She's kept off the same mark here, but you get the impression that the step up to 1.5 miles certainly is going to suit her, very much in keeping with her pedigree, and a little bit like Slimmar, obviously won here, or stayed 2 miles particularly well, so she was a strong stayer. So coming up in trip will definitely suit her. Whether she's quite ready for this type of grade at this stage in her career, I'm not just sure. But that said, she's down there at the bottom of the weight. She's got a nice low weight here, and as I say, the step up in trip should definitely suit.
And also down at the bottom, we've got Mawarid, who's running from out of the handicap just. Obviously, it will depend on who the jockey booking is. He's a tricky one, isn't he? He's clearly got some ability, but he keeps chucking it away in the stalls. I know James has done a lot of work with him at home, and at home he's fine. But, anyone brave enough to take him on, he could represent a bit of each way value if he finally gets his act together when he jumps out.
Yeah, that's the issue with the horse, isn't it? I think you will know your fate very early on when he puts it all together. I suppose even when he put it all together at Chelmsford, he hung right across the track, didn't he? Last season, still managed to win. Obviously, he unseated his rider here last season in the stalls. He came out of the stalls okay at Lingfield when he lost his place and then ran on again in that race at the Bayrath Bar one towards the back end of last season. And obviously, at Wolverhampton on his seasonal return, he reared up in the stalls, and unfortunately his chance was gone again. But for anybody who's supporting him, as again, I'd say you'll probably know your fate very early on.
Okay, if we look ahead now to the weekend in France, I'm gutted that I'm not there. This is the first time I've missed it for nearly 6 years now. Yesterday they had the only purebred Arabian sale in Europe at the Arcana sale at Saint-Cloud. Top price there was a colt called Pasha, who realised 125,000 euros. Very nice looking colt. It's only 2 years old, so we'll have to wait another year before we see him out. But it's good to see that the market's holding. The prices for 2-year-olds were actually, the average was increased on last year, which I actually found a bit surprising. But on the whole, although some of the figures were a little bit down, it's good to see that the prices are maintaining in what is a very difficult year. Right, so if we just have another look now at the 4-year-old fillies race, which is run at Longchamp on Saturday, that's headed obviously by Lady Princess, who was a very exciting 3-year-old. Slightly not quite followed through this year, but still obviously a force to be reckoned with. I think part of the problem with her is she is a little bit on the small side, and possibly some horses now are improving beyond her. Also, what do you think of the other fillies in that race?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen her that much this campaign, have we? Obviously, she finished behind Artemis in her most recent race, that Group 3 at Le Test. And they were nicely clear of the others. Quite a few of the others actually reoppose in this race. So strictly on the form book, she's got a bit to find with Artemis. But obviously, Artemis had the benefit of a couple of runs prior to that, and we hadn't seen Lady Princess since she had 2 runs in Qatar over the winter. So yeah, I think there's probably a case that some of the others are catching her up now. If there's one that might well improve a little bit further for me, it might be Mithag, horse number 3 on the race card, one of 4 in the race for Al Shikab Racing. Thomas Forsey trains this horse, and she was actually 3rd in that race. She'd obviously finished behind Lady Princess at Saint-Cloud last year. She wasn't beaten too far in that race, and she kind of shaped as though the run was going to be needed. And I'm quite keen on her, maybe from an each way point of view, but a decent field, 10 of them lining up, and be interesting to see what the market makes of them. To be honest, not an easy race to price up, I don't think.
No, I would agree with you there. It does look a little bit of a trappy contest to pick the winner, I think. If we now move on to Sunday's race at the Qatar Arabian World Cup, yet another Group 1. So it really concludes a fabulous weekend of Arabian racing in Paris. I mean, obviously the pick is Ebraz, just because of, he's now on a roll of, 5 consecutive Group 1 wins as part of the Doha Triple Crown. It looks a messy race. There's no obvious pace. A lot of horses in the race have got good form on soft ground, or at least a proven on soft ground, even if it's not their preferred underfoot surface. It looks a bit trappy, Gary. What do you think?
Yeah, as I was writing the preview for this, I've gone through it and I thought, well, where's the pace going to come from? And I'm sort of struggling to find out where it might be, which wouldn't suit any of the likely main protagonists. Ebraz, obviously, he would prefer a stronger gallop. I noticed in the race last year, he was kept quite wide on the course. He probably covered a lot more ground than most of the others in last year's race, probably to make sure that he didn't get any hard luck stories, which can often be the case in this race because it's usually quite a big field. Again, it's a slightly different dynamic this year, whereas we've only got the most 8 of them. So tactics could unfortunately become a part. The ground conditions, I mean, it's going to be very, very testing. I mean, Ebraz won the race last year on soft ground, or what was officially described as soft ground, but I think it's going to be bordering on heavy by the time we get to Sunday. So I know quite a lot of his size progeny do tend to do quite well on the surface, but for me, he ideally would prefer a sounder surface. But I mean, he's rated £2 just inferior to El Mortages, who's the highest ever rated Arabian since the classifications came out. And I think if he goes on to win this race and land his 8th Group 1, you'd almost have to class him probably a little bit higher than El Mortages for me, to be honest. So in terms of his longevity as well, that's another thing to consider, because he's obviously been racing now for 5-6 seasons. And Julian seems to think that he might even still be getting better. I mean, we often find with the Arabians that they do develop a little bit later and continue to progress as they get older, don't they? But in terms of longevity and consistency in the horses that he's come up against in Group 1 races, I think for me he's probably the best.
Wouldn't disagree with you at all, Gary. I think, particularly if he wins on Sunday, he's surely, for me, I think his third Emir Sword cemented his position, having won the first Doha Triple Crown, but then to come back and win so convincingly at Goodwood this summer, that was a fantastic performance. And for me, he's head and shoulders above the rest of them. I mean, in the race, you've got Katab, who's finished second in this race twice now, second to obviously Ebraz last year, second to Faz Al Khalidia the year before. proven on soft ground. You know, I can't see him turning the tables unless, you know, he gets lucky or there's a, you know, a significant hold up in the race. If I'm looking for a horse to beat Ebraz, I would say probably Heian. He's the least exposed of the Group 1 winners. Definitely likes the soft ground. I mean, it was the ground I don't know whether you saw the race at Deauville back in the summer. It was really not pleasant. They raced in atrocious conditions there. You know, he looks the possible improver to me. I spoke to his trainer, Freddie Sanchez, earlier this week. Horse is working really well. He likes soft ground. You know, there's no more that he can do to prepare his horse, but he would be my pick of the others, I think, to go on. I'd be a bit worried about Fazza Khalidia because he's had obviously he's obviously had some problems, which is why we haven't seen him. Clearly a very good horse on his day, but whether he'd be able to pull that back. I mean, he won the Dragon well enough. But again, the horses who win the Dragon, their record in this race is not that strong. I think only Al Mortazez is one of the recent ones to have doubled up, and really he wasn't given a race in that at all. I think everybody had just accepted that he was the best horse and was there to run around after him.
Yeah, we'll go through those. I mean, Katab's an unbelievable horse because all bar 5 of his 19 runs have been in Group 1 company. He's only been out the first 4 once, and he was 5th then, and that was in this race back in 2017. As you point out, he's been second in the race a couple of times. He will handle the ground. He's possibly had a slightly interrupted preparation perhaps too, because we've only seen him once this campaign as well. Obviously, we saw him in the Amir Sword earlier on in the year, but he's only had one run this summer, obviously in the Doha Cup behind Heian. He wasn't beaten far. The fact that he handles conditions is going to be a plus, but he'd be a little bit disappointed, I suppose, to be honest, if he was up to winning. We better mention Taith because obviously he's running in the race for the 5th time. He's actually beaten Ebraz in the past, albeit a long time ago in the Qatar International at Goodwood, where obviously the ground conditions were pretty rotten. So he liked the ground, but he was well beaten behind Ebraz in the Qatar International, and there's no real reason why he should reverse that form. I agree with Fazza Al Khalidia. I wonder with him on the conditions as well. Obviously, he ran in that Doha Cup where he finished 5th. And for me, when he won this race, he quickened up nicely on decent ground, off a decent pace as well. Whether he'd be able to be as effective if the race isn't run as strongly and on much worse ground, I have my slight doubts. And he's obviously had 1 or 2 issues in his career as well, because we haven't seen him that often. He did win the Dragon last time out, probably workmanlike, but it was more probably a race just to put him spot on for this, you'd fancy. So you can see him hitting the frame, but again, all things, on the ground, that would have to be a concern. And Heian, well, we know that he handles the ground. He bolted up at Toulouse at a subsequent Group 1 winner behind him when he won there on his seasonal return. The ground was desperate that day. Obviously, it was pretty desperate when he won the Doha Cup at Deauville last time out. So the fact that he handles conditions is going to be a huge plus, and he hasn't raced against Ebraz before either. So it's a new, his first time running against the horse. All things considered, though, I think it'd be hard pressed to say that he's got, better form to beat Ebraz. You'd be disappointed, let's put it that way, if Ebraz isn't up to winning this race. As long as we get a fairly run race, okay, we might not get the strong pace, and that Ebraz would probably be better suited by. But for me, he's the best horse of these, so I'll be disappointed if he doesn't win.
Couldn't agree more, Gary. I mean, he's certainly the class performer in the race. His record speaks for itself. And as you say, it would be disappointing if he didn't continue his march into the history books, because what he's achieved in the last 2 years particularly, certainly the best Arabian I've seen in my lifetime. And I think he is better than Al Mortazez because of the longevity of his career. Obviously, you have to wait till Sunday to see the results, but I was able to speak to his trainer, Julian Smart, today. It's live from Chantilly.
Hi Debs, hope you're well. Hasn't stopped raining here. It's absolutely chucking it down. I'm standing underneath a little shelter here now, soaking wet. It's miserable. The ground is not going to be good. However, the ground won't affect Ebraz, as we all know from Goodwood of about, 3 years ago now? Or was it 4 even? I can't remember. Anyway, the ground won't affect him. Listen, Debs, he's in very good form. He's in very good form. I'm happy with him. Not much more we can do now. You know, we've given him a little bit of downtime since Goodwood, but he was so well after Goodwood and so fresh after that. It was unbelievable. So we've given him a little bit of downtime. We've brought him back up again now, obviously. Just followed the same program. And he's well. Now it's in the racing gods and the weather, obviously. As far as dangers go, it's a small field of 8. Heian is not an unknown quantity, but the way Heian won in Deauville was impressive, and that was poor ground. And he cruised up alongside that group of horses and won comfortably, I would say. However, that day there was pace. There was 3 or 4 horses that went off in front, and the main principals all sat behind as usual. So he's a danger for sure. He's a big danger. Faza Al-Khaladia goes without saying. Taif goes without saying. Katab again. And Katab will be much helped by the soft ground, or whatever the ground is going to be, but it won't be quick. That's for sure. Fingers crossed, Debs. Let's see what happens. All right, cheers.
Thank you. We'll be back to review the results of the Baker McVeigh International, a review of the racing in France, and we'll be looking forward to the Zayn Arabian Stud.co.uk Handicap Stakes, which is a 0-65 run over a mile at Wolverhampton on Saturday the 17th of October. Thank you. Bye-bye.